I swapped my wedding ring for a tracker and found my wife's hidden apartment. It started with a gnawing, a little whisper in the back of my skull that refused to be silenced. Not a dramatic movie trailer kind of dread, but the quiet, insidious kind that settles in your gut like bad coffee. Sarah. My Sarah. The woman I'd built my entire life around, the one whose laughter was the soundtrack to my mornings, the one whose touch felt like coming home. She was changing. Or maybe I was just starting to see her for the first time in years. Before you dive into this, if this story's hitting you, if you're feeling anything, anger, sadness, maybe just a flicker of understanding, do me a favor, hit that like button. It really helps. And if you know someone who needs to hear this kind of raw, unvarnished truth, share it with them. Smash that subscribe button too, so you don't miss the rest of what happens. And seriously, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think, what you'd do. I need to know I'm not just screaming into the void here. It wasn't one big thing. It never is it? It's the 1,000 tiny paper cuts. The way she started staying late at work. Big project, she'd say. Her eyes a little too bright, a little too quick to meet mine. The way her phone was suddenly glued to her hand, a silent black shield against the world. The late-night texts that stopped appearing on her laptop screen when I walked into the room. Little things, easy to dismiss. Work stress, I told myself. Everyone gets stressed. She's a rising star, that's what happens. I was proud of her, genuinely. She'd worked her ass off to get where she was. Junior partner at that big law firm downtown, the one with the glass tower that scrapes the sky. I'd seen the late nights, the missed dinners, the tired slump of her shoulders when she finally collapsed into bed. I'd been the supportive husband, the one who made her coffee in the morning, who left her notes on the fridge, who didn't complain when our weekends got swallowed by billable hours. I was the good guy, the steady hand. Then there was the smell. Faint, almost imperceptible at first. Something floral but sharper, with an undercurrent of something else. Not her usual perfume, not mine. It clung to her clothes, to her hair, even after she'd showered. I asked her once, casually, "New perfume, honey? Smells nice." She'd flinched, just a little, a barely visible tightening of her jaw. "Oh, just trying something different," she'd said, her voice a little too light. "You like it?" I'd said yes, of course. What else could I say? But the question, unasked, hung in the air between us. Why the lie? It was like watching a slow-motion car wreck. You see the wheels start to wobble, the smoke starting to curl, and you know it's coming, but you can't stop it. You just watch. I started watching her. Not in a creepy way, not at first, just noticing. The way she'd check her phone with a furtive glance, the way she'd suddenly get quiet when I entered a room, the way her stories about work started to have holes in them, little inconsistencies I could almost but not quite nail down. One night she was out late, of course. Client dinner, she texted, "Don't wait up." I was in the living room, the game on low, trying to lose myself in the meaningless roar of the crowd. My phone buzzed, a notification from her cloud storage. Usually I ignored these things, but tonight my fingers moved before my brain caught up. A folder, project notes. I clicked it. A single file. Budget. Curiosity, a poison I knew well, took over. It wasn't about budgets. It was a series of photos, pictures of an apartment, a small, sparsely furnished place. A woman in the photos, not Sarah, another woman, blonde, pretty, laughing. And then a photo of a ring, a diamond ring, not mine, not Sarah's. It was a picture of a wedding band, plain gold, and in the corner, a blurry shot of my wedding ring, the one on my left hand. My stomach churned. This wasn't a work thing. This wasn't stress. This was something else entirely. This was a secret life. The next few days were a blur of denial and dread. I tried to act normal. I made her breakfast, kissed her goodbye, asked about her day. But inside, I was a coiled spring. Every word, every glance, every touch was scrutinized. Was she hiding something? Or was I losing my mind, projecting my own insecurities onto our perfect life? We had a good life, didn't we? The house in the suburbs, the 2 cars in the driveway, the upcoming anniversary trip to the coast we'd booked months ago, the comfortable routine, the quiet evenings on the couch, her head on my chest. That was us, wasn't it? I started digging, not aggressively, tentatively, like a child poking a sleeping dog. I went through her browser history when she was in the shower. Nothing obvious. No dating sites, no incognito searches for how to cheat, just work, lots and lots of work. I checked her bank statements, which I rarely did. Everything seemed to be in order. Bills paid, the usual spending habits. Then I remembered the tracker. My dad. He was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, always worried about his investments, his property.
A few years ago, for my birthday, he'd given me this high-tech GPS tracker. For emergencies, he'd said, winking, or if you ever need to keep an eye on something valuable. I'd laughed it off, put it in a drawer and forgotten about it, until now. It was a tiny thing, about the size of a quarter, with a magnetic backing. I'd never even activated it, but I found the packaging in the back of my sock drawer. I took it to my car, my old Ford F-150, the truck I rarely drove anymore since Sarah had insisted on something more practical, more suburban. I attached the tracker to the underside of the passenger seat. It was a stupid idea, I knew. What if she saw it? What if it didn't work? But I had to do something, anything. The next morning, she left for work as usual. She kissed me on the cheek, a quick pack that felt both familiar and foreign. "Love you," she said, her voice a little rushed. "See you tonight." I stood there watching her walk to her sleek silver SUV, and then I pulled out my phone, the tracker app. It had taken me hours to figure out how to set it up, thanks to a surprisingly helpful online forum that was probably full of people just like me. The app was basic, just a dot on a map. Her car icon appeared, moving, north, towards downtown, just like always. My heart pounded a little harder. It was stupid. Of course she was going to work. I was being an idiot. I spent the day in a haze, my work at the office a distant hum. I kept checking the app. Her car stayed in the same general area for hours, presumably parked in the firm's garage. Then around lunchtime, the icon started moving. Not towards home, not towards a lunch meeting. It was heading west, towards the older part of town, the part with the slightly run-down warehouses and the trendy, repurposed loft apartments, the part she never went to, the part we never went to. I told myself it was a detour, a coffee run, a spontaneous decision, but my gut screamed otherwise. I left work early, telling my boss I was feeling sick. I drove, my own truck feeling unfamiliar and clunky as I followed the little blue dot on my phone. The address the tracker pointed to wasn't a business, it was an apartment building.
A nondescript brick building nestled between a laundromat and a small convenience store. Not fancy. Not Sarah. Definitely not Sarah. My hands were shaking as I parked down the street, my truck looking out of place amongst the beat-up sedans and the occasional motorcycle. I watched the building, my eyes glued to the screen. Her car icon stayed put. So she was in there. Who was she meeting? What was so important it had to be in a place like this? A place she'd never even mentioned. I felt a cold dread begin to seep into my bones, chilling me despite the warm afternoon sun. I thought about her text, about the wedding band in the photo. My wedding band. The one she wore every single day. The one that was currently on her finger, I assumed. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the truck amplifying the frantic thumping of my own heart. I debated what to do. Walk up to the door? Call her? Text her? Each option felt like a trap. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I got out of the truck. I walked towards the building, my steps uncertain. I circled the block, trying to see into the windows. They were mostly tinted or covered by blinds. I reached the front door of the building. It was unlocked. A cheap intercom system was mounted beside it. I scanned the names. Nothing familiar. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the corner, almost hidden. A small sign with a number. Apartment 3B. A woman's name. Not Sarah's. And a man's name. I couldn't make it out clearly. I took out my phone again. Opened the tracker app. The dot was inside the building, in the vicinity of the 3rd floor. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment of truth. The point of no return. I pushed open the building door and stepped into a dim, musty hallway. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and something faintly sweet, like cheap air freshener. I took the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. Each step felt heavy, loaded with the weight of my suspicion. I reached the 3rd floor. A short corridor. 3 doors. 3A, 3B, 3C. I walked towards 3B. I could hear voices. Muffled. A woman's laugh. It was a happy sound. A sound I knew. Sarah's laugh. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a certainty. A sickening, soul-crushing certainty. I stood outside the door, my hand hovering over the knob. I could hear her clearly now, talking to someone, whispering. And then,
A man's voice. Deep, confident, and Sarah's response. Soft, affectionate. Not the way she spoke to me. Not anymore. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound, trying to make it go away. But it was real. It was happening. I thought about our wedding day, the vows, the promises, the future we'd planned, all of it crumbling into dust. I opened my eyes, my vision blurred. I took a deep breath, the stale air filling my lungs. Then, I reached out and turned the doorknob. The click of the lock was deafening in the sudden silence. The door swung inward, and there she was, not alone, not at work, not anywhere I ever expected to find her. And the man beside her, he looked up, startled. And Sarah, she turned, her eyes widening, her smile freezing, then shattering. The look on her face, it was a mixture of shock, fear, and something that looked horribly like guilt. But it was too late for guilt. It was too late for everything. The air in the small apartment was thick with unspoken words, with shattered trust, with a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at the life she had built in secret. A life that had been hidden behind a carefully constructed wall of lies. A wall I had finally, devastatingly, torn down. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument, any shout, any accusatory word I might have imagined. It was a void, and I was drowning in it. Sarah's eyes, wide and glassy, flickered between me and the man beside her, a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, lean, with dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt, the kind that shows you don't really care about fashion, but still manage to look put together. He didn't have the polished, orbit look of my colleagues, or the rougher edge of my buddies from college. He was just there, occupying the space that should have been mine, the space that had been mine for 15 years. He finally broke the silence, his voice low, a rumble that didn't betray any of the panic I saw warring on Sarah's face. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah, bless her, found her voice, though it was thin and reedy, like a child's caught doing something wrong. "Mark, this is my husband, Mark." She said my name like it was a foreign object, something she was holding with tongs. My husband. The words landed like stones. I looked at her, really looked at her, past the shock, past the betrayal that was blooming on my face. She was wearing jeans, a soft blue sweater, not her work clothes. She looked relaxed, comfortable, the kind of comfortable you only get when you're truly yourself, or when you're with someone you feel completely safe with. And that was the gut punch. The realization that this was a whole other Sarah, a Sarah I didn't know, a Sarah who wasn't mine. "Husband?" the other man repeated, his eyebrows drawing together. He glanced at Sarah, a question in his eyes that she didn't answer. She just stared at me, her lips slightly parted, as if she'd forgotten how to breathe. I managed to find my own voice, a raspy sound that felt alien coming from my throat. "Yeah, husband. 15 years. And you are." I kept my gaze fixed on her, refusing to acknowledge him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of my attention. He was just a symptom. The disease was Sarah. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and she finally turned her head, her gaze flicking back to his. A silent conversation passed between them, one I was no longer privy to, one that felt like a conspiracy against me. It was so blatant, so open, it was almost insulting. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The shock had stripped away all pretenses. "Sarah," I said, my voice gaining a little more strength, a dangerous edge creeping in. "What the hell is going on?" Her hands went up, as if to ward off an invisible blow. "Mark, please, not here, not like this, not here." Not like this. I took a step further into the apartment, my eyes scanning the small living area. It was lived in, tasteful, in a minimalist sort of way. A few art prints on the wall, a comfortable-looking sofa, a small dining table. There were books on a shelf, a few plants on the windowsill. It was a home, a second home. For whom? For them. You have a second apartment, Sarah? I asked, laced with a bitterness I could barely contain. A secret life. She winced, her shoulders slumping. The other man shifted his weight, a subtle tension radiating from him. He was watching me, assessing me, and I hated it. I hated that he was in her space, in this space that was clearly meant for something other than what she shared with me. It's not what you think, she stammered, her eyes pleading. But her eyes, those beautiful, familiar eyes, were also filled with a truth I couldn't ignore. They were the eyes of a woman caught, and the guilt was as palpable as the stale cigarette smoke in the hallway. Oh really? I took another step.
Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. It looks like you have another life. Another man, I gestured to him. And you've been lying to me. For how long, Sarah? She didn't answer. She just looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant sound of traffic from the street below. The man beside her finally spoke again, his voice calm, almost unnervingly so. Sarah, maybe you should tell him. Tell me. Yes, Sarah, tell me. Tell me about the tracker in my truck. Tell me about the photos of the apartment. Tell me about this man. Tell me everything. Tell me why my entire world, the one I thought we'd carefully constructed, had been a lie. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in them. Regret? Shame? Or maybe just the dawning realization that the game was over. It's been a few months, Mark. A few months. That was all she offered. A few months. My mind raced, replaying every late night, every work emergency, every unexplained absence. It all clicked into place with brutal clarity. The smell, the hurried phone calls, the distance that had been growing between us, a distance I'd attributed to stress, to her demanding career. It wasn't stress. It was him. It was this. A few months? My voice was dangerously quiet now, the rage simmering beneath the surface. And you think a few months covers it? You think that explains why you're here in this apartment with this guy? She flinched. It's complicated. Complicated? I let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. No, Sarah, this isn't complicated. This is simple. This is betrayal. This is a lie. This is you running around with another man while I'm at home, worrying about you, making dinner, paying our mortgage. The other man watched us, his expression unreadable. He hadn't said a word since his initial question. He was letting Sarah handle it, letting her explain. And I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear her justify this. I wanted to hear her try and make sense of the wreckage she'd created. It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, her voice trembling. It did. It just did? I repeated, incredulous. So you just woke up one day and decided to have an affair? To sneak around? To lie to my face every single day? My anger was starting to bubble up, hot and suffocating. I could feel my hands clenching into fists at my sides. I was unhappy, Mark, she said, her voice gaining a fragile strength. We were unhappy. Unhappy? I scoffed. And that's your excuse? You couldn't talk to me? You couldn't tell me you were unhappy? Instead, you found someone else? Someone to make you happy? I took a step closer, my eyes boring into hers. Who is he, Sarah? Tell me. Who is this man you're so happy with? She hesitated, then finally spoke, her voice barely audible. His name is David. David. Just David. No last name, no context, just David. And he was standing right there, looking at me with an unnerving calm. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't apologizing. He was just present, an undeniable fact in the room. David, I echoed, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. I turned my gaze to him. So, David, you know she's married, right? You know she has a husband who loves her, who built a life with her. He finally met my eyes, his gaze steady and unwavering. I know, Sarah.
I know who she is." "Oh, you know who she is," I repeated, a humorless smile stretching my lips. "And what do you know, David? Do you know she's been lying to me for months? Do you know she's been leading a double life? Or do you just think she's a single woman you met at some bar?" He didn't flinch. "I know she's been unhappy for a long time." My blood boiled. "Unhappy? We've been together for 15 years. We built a life. We have a house. We have plans. And you think she's been unhappy? And that justifies this? This sordid little arrangement?" Sarah finally snapped. "Mark, stop it. You can't just barge in here and start yelling at us." "Barge in?" I laughed again, a harsh, broken sound. "I found out where you were hiding, Sarah. I put a tracker on my own car to follow you because I suspected, because I felt it, because you've been acting like a stranger for months. So forgive me if I don't feel like I'm barging in. I feel like I finally found the truth." I looked around the apartment again, my eyes lingering on a framed photo on a small side table. It was Sarah and David, smiling. They looked happy, genuinely happy. It was a snapshot of a life I was completely excluded from, a life she had actively chosen. "Who is he, Sarah?" I asked again, my voice low and dangerous. "Is he one of your colleagues? Someone from work? You know how many late nights you've been pulling." The implication hung in the air, heavy and damning. She looked away, her silence a confession. She'd been working late. She'd been stressed. She'd been seeing him. The pieces were all there, forming a picture I couldn't unsee. "No," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's not from work. I met him at a gallery opening, months ago, before things got bad." "Before things got bad," I repeated, the words catching in my throat. "When exactly did things get bad, Sarah? When did you decide that I wasn't enough? When did you decide that our life, the one we built together, was worth throwing away for this?" I gestured around the apartment, at him. He stepped forward then, a quiet authority in his movements. "Mark," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be. But Sarah and we've developed feelings for each other, and she's been unhappy for a long time. We didn't seek this out. It just happened." "It just happened?" I echoed, the phrase so damn infuriating, as if love or lust or whatever this was some kind of uncontrollable force of nature, like a hurricane that just swept them up without any agency. No, this was a choice, a series of choices. You can't just throw away 15 years of marriage because you developed feelings for someone else. I spat, the words laced with venom. That's not how it works. That's not how relationships work. You work through things. You communicate. You don't go out and find a replacement. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. The composed facade was gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated pain. "I tried, Mark. I tried to talk to you, but you were always busy, always working, always distant. Distant." I felt a surge of pure, white-hot rage. "I was working to provide for us, Sarah. I was working to make sure we had the life you wanted, the life you said you wanted. But it wasn't the life I had, Mark," she sobbed. "It was a life of appointments and deadlines and checking boxes. I felt like a ghost in my own life. And David, he saw me. He actually saw me." The accusation stung, a sharp, unexpected blow. Was that true? Had I been so caught up in my own life, my own routines, that I'd stopped seeing her, stopped noticing the growing unhappiness in her eyes, the hollowness in her laughter? The thought was almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. "So you ran to him," I said, my voice cracking. "You ran to him instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix us. You just gave up." David stepped in again. "She didn't give up, Mark."
She looked for happiness, and she found it. My head snapped towards him. "Found it? You think you found happiness here? In a stolen apartment? In a secret relationship? What kind of happiness is that?" He met my gaze, his own eyes hardening slightly. "The kind that makes you feel alive again. The kind that makes you feel seen. The kind that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning." His words were a direct assault. They implied that my presence, our life together, had been a dead weight, a suffocating burden. And the worst part was, a sliver of doubt, a terrifying, nauseating doubt began to creep in. Had I been that absent? Had I been so wrapped up in my own world that I'd failed her? "So what now?" I asked, my voice rough, hoarse. The fight was draining out of me, replaced by a hollow ache. "You just expect me to walk away? To disappear? To pretend this never happened?" Sarah shook her head, tears still flowing. "No, Mark, I don't expect that. I don't know what I expect." David remained silent, a stoic observer of the wreckage. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made any grand gestures. He'd simply been present, a quiet, undeniable force in Sarah's life. And in that moment, looking at him, at her, at the life they'd carved out for themselves in the shadows, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. Not just of my wife, but of the man I thought I was. The man who was strong, capable, who could provide and protect and make his wife happy. That man was a fiction. The reality was a broken marriage, a stolen apartment, and a stranger standing where I should have been. "So you found your happiness," I said, my voice barely audible. I looked at Sarah, my eyes searching hers for any sign of the woman I'd married, any flicker of the love we'd shared. But all I saw was fear and a profound sadness. "And you destroyed mine." I turned, my feet feeling heavy, my entire body vibrating with a suppressed tremor. I didn't slam the door, I didn't yell, I just walked out, the stale air of the hallway feeling like a welcome relief from the suffocating tension inside that apartment. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of Sarah and David, happy and together in their secret sanctuary, was seared into my mind. I walked down the stairs, my heart a lead weight in my chest. As I reached the ground floor, I heard the building door creak open. David. He was standing there, his arms crossed, watching me. "We need to talk, Mark," he said, his voice still calm but with an edge of finality, "about how we're going to do this." I stopped, my hand on the cold metal of the outer door. His words hit me like another blow. How we're going to do this. He was already talking about moving forward, about dividing the spoils, about me, Sarah, and him existing in some new, horrifying configuration. "You think we're going to talk about it?" I scoffed, the anger surging back, raw and uncontrollable. "You think I'm going to sit down with you and figure out a visitation schedule for my wife?" He didn't flinch. "Sarah deserves to be happy, and you deserve to move on." The sheer audacity of his statement stunned me into silence. Move on. As if this was just another chapter, a minor inconvenience. As if 15 years of my life, of our life, could just be neatly tied up and put away. "You don't get to decide that," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had never known. "You don't get to decide what I deserve. You're the one who stepped into my marriage. You're the one who lied with her. You don't get to dictate anything." He took a step towards me. "I'm just trying to be reasonable, Mark. This is going to be messy. We can make it less messy." I shoved the door open and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, the harsh light momentarily disorienting me. I walked quickly towards my truck, my mind a chaotic storm of anger, hurt, and confusion. I got in, slammed the door, and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the ignition to catch. As the engine roared to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror. David was still standing by the apartment building entrance, a solitary figure against the backdrop of faded brick. He was watching me, waiting, as if he knew I wouldn't just disappear, as if he knew this was only the beginning. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he was right. This was far from over. The betrayal had been laid bare, but the true cost, the real fallout, was yet to come. I drove away, the sound of my own engine a deafening roar in the sudden, suffocating emptiness of my life. But the most chilling thought wasn't about Sarah or David or the apartment. It was about myself. Had I been so oblivious? Had I been so consumed by my own world that I'd allowed this to happen? Had I, in my own way, contributed to the very destruction of everything I held dear? The questions gnawed at me, a new layer of pain added to the already unbearable burden. And as I sped down the unfamiliar streets, the tracker app still glowing on my phone, I wondered what other secrets Sarah had kept, what other hidden lives she'd been living that I hadn't even begun to uncover. The world outside the truck window became a blur of identical suburban houses, manicured lawns, and the steady, relentless hum of tires on asphalt. Every street sign, every familiar storefront felt like a cruel joke. This was the landscape of our life, the life I thought was solid, immutable, built on a foundation of shared dreams and quiet understanding. Now it was just scenery for a journey I never wanted to take, a journey away from everything I knew.
The tracker app on my phone was still open, a digital tether to the lie that had shattered my reality. It was a small blue dot representing Sarah's car, a car that had just been parked at David's apartment. The coordinates were burned into my mind, a constant sickening reminder. I couldn't bring myself to close it, not yet. It was like holding onto the last shard of glass from a broken mirror, a painful acknowledgement of what had been. I found myself driving, not towards home, but aimlessly, letting the vehicle take me wherever the road led. The anger was a molten river coursing through me, hot and destructive. It pulsed in my temples, tightened my chest, made it hard to breathe. But beneath the rage, a cold, creeping dread was taking root. The dread of what came next. The dread of facing Sarah, of facing the empty spaces in her home that would now echo with her absence. The dread of looking in the mirror and not recognizing the man who had let this happen. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Her name, usually a balm, now felt like a brand. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the incoming call a tangible manifestation of the impossible situation we were in. I debated answering, then with a weary sigh, I swiped to accept. Mark? Her voice was fragile, strained, laced with a desperate plea. Does it matter? The words were rough, choked with emotion I couldn't fully articulate. I was at your apartment, Sarah, where you've been spending your late nights. A beat of silence. I could practically hear her swallowing, the effort it took to speak. Mark, please, let's just talk. When you get home. Home? The word felt hollow, a foreign concept. I don't know if that's my home anymore, Sarah. Not after what I saw. Not after him.
He means nothing, she blurted out, her voice suddenly firmer, laced with a frantic defensiveness. He's a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. My laughter was a harsh, broken sound. A mistake? A few months of sneaking around, lying to my face is a mistake? Is that what you call it? Because it feels a lot more like a choice, Sarah. A deliberate, calculated choice. It wasn't like that, she whispered, her voice cracking. It happened. I was lost, Mark, and he made me feel like I wasn't alone. So you found a lifeboat instead of trying to fix the ship? My anger flared again, hot and immediate. You found someone else to fill the void instead of talking to me, instead of telling me you were unhappy, instead of fighting for us? I tried to tell you, she cried, and now the desperation in her voice was undeniable. I tried so many times, but you were always somewhere else, always busy, always in your own world. I felt invisible, Mark, like I was living with a roommate, not a husband. The accusation, sharp and true, landed like a physical blow. Invisible. Was that me? Had I become so consumed by work, by the illusion of providing for us, that I'd stopped seeing the woman I loved? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken resentments, with years of missed connections and unmet needs. I didn't know, I finally managed, the words barely audible. The self-recrimination was a bitter pill to swallow. Guilt, a corrosive acid, began to eat away at the edges of my rage. You didn't know, she repeated, her voice softer now, laced with a profound sadness. And I didn't know how to make you see. So I just drifted away. And then he was there. And he saw me. He actually saw me, Mark. The raw honesty of her confession was disarming. It chipped away at my defenses, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. The image of David, looking at her with what she described as recognition, was a stark contrast to my own perceived obliviousness. So what now, Sarah? I asked, my voice rough with emotion. What do you expect me to do? Just accept it? Accept that 15 years of our lives meant so little that you could just throw it all away for someone you met a few months ago? I don't expect you to accept it, Mark, she said, her voice trembling. I don't expect anything. I can't live the lie anymore. I can't go back to the way things were. Because the way things were wasn't real for me. Not anymore. Not real? I choked out. What about our vows, Sarah? What about our commitment? Was that not real? It was real, Mark. It was real for a long time. But things change. People change. And sometimes you have to make a choice. Even if it hurts. The cold, hard reality of her words settled over me like a shroud. She had made her choice. And that choice involved David.
and a life that was no longer mine. The anger was still there, a smoldering ember, but it was being overshadowed by a deep, profound grief. A grief for the life we'd lost, for the woman I thought I knew, and for the man I had become. I need time, Sarah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I can't do this right now. I understand, Mark, she replied, and there was a genuine regret in her tone that, infuriatingly, made it even harder to bear. Take all the time you need. I hung up, the silence in the truck deafening. The tracker app on my phone was still open. Sarah's car was no longer at David's apartment. It was moving, heading towards our house, towards the life she was leaving behind. I closed the app, the blue dot vanishing, leaving only the stark, empty interface. I drove home, the familiar streets now feeling alien and hostile. The house, our house, loomed ahead, a monument to the life that had been. As I pulled into the driveway, Sarah's car was already there. She was inside, probably waiting. The thought of walking through that door, of facing her, of facing the wreckage of our marriage, was almost unbearable. But I had to. There was no escaping it. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat, and got out of the truck. The front door opened before I even reached it. Sarah stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. She looked like a stranger, a beautiful, broken stranger. Mark, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stood on the porch, unable to step inside, the threshold a chasm I didn't know how to cross. Sarah, I replied, my own voice sounding distant, unfamiliar. We stood there, two strangers in front of the life we had built, the life that was now crumbling around us. The silence stretched, filled with the ghosts of laughter, of arguments, of quiet nights together. It was the sound of endings. I'm so sorry, Mark, she finally said, her voice choked with tears. I really am. I looked at her, at the raw pain etched on her face, and a wave of something akin to pity washed over me, mingling with the still simmering anger and the overwhelming grief. She was hurting, and in a twisted way, I knew she was telling the truth. She was sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't unbreak 15 years of shared history. Sorry couldn't erase the image of her with David. I know, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a profound, soul-crushing weariness. I know you are. I turned, my gaze drifting to the garage. My truck sat there, a symbol of my independence, of my escape route. I can't stay here tonight, Sarah. She nodded, her eyes downcast. I understand. I didn't go inside. I didn't want to. The house felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of unspoken words and fractured promises. I walked back to my truck, the keys feeling cold and heavy in my hand. As I got in, I glanced back at her. She was still standing in the doorway, a solitary figure silhouetted against the dim light of the foyer. She looked small, lost, and for a fleeting moment, I saw not the woman who had betrayed me, but the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, now adrift in her own sea of the bread. I started the engine, the familiar rumble a small comfort in the chaos. I drove away, the headlights cutting through the encroaching darkness. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to drive, to put distance between myself and the wreckage. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, a painted backdrop to my internal turmoil. The question still swirled. Where had I gone wrong? Had I been that blind? Had I really allowed myself to become so disconnected that my wife sought solace in the arms of another man? The self-doubt was a gnawing beast, feeding on my pain. I ended up at a bar, a dimly lit place with worn leather booths and the clatter of glasses. I ordered a drink, then another, the amber liquid doing little to dull the sharp edges of my grief. The faces around me were blurred, their laughter and conversations a distant hum. I was an island, adrift in a sea of my own making, Hours later, the bartender was cleaning up. The lights were being dimmed, and I was still there, nursing my last drink. The alcohol had done nothing to numb the pain, only dulled the senses. I walked out into the cool night air, the silence of the deserted street a welcome relief. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to face the emptiness of my own apartment. I found myself at a park, sitting on a bench overlooking the darkened city skyline.
The lights twinkled like distant stars, each one a tiny beacon in the vast expanse. It was a moment of quiet, of stillness, after the storm. The anger had subsided, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache. The confusion lingered, a fog I couldn't see through. But there was also a strange sense of clarity. Sarah had made her choice, and I had to make mine. There would be no easy answers, no neat resolutions. This was the messiness of life, the brutal reality of human fallibility. I had been betrayed, deeply and irrevocably. But I had also, in my own way, failed. I had allowed the distance to grow, allowed myself to become oblivious. I stood up, the chill in the air seeping into my bones. The night was still young, and my life, the one that stretched out before me, was an uncharted territory. It would be hard, it would be painful, but I would survive it. I had to. I had lost a wife, a home, a future I had envisioned, but I still had myself, and that, in the end, would have to be enough. I started walking, my footsteps echoing on the deserted path, each step a slow, deliberate movement away from the past and towards whatever uncertain future awaited me. The city lights shimmered, not as distant stars, but as scattered fragments of a life I had to rebuild, one broken piece at a time.